Hey, it's Saoirse. Hope you guys are doing good today. I did not sleep last night. I just couldn't. And that is not normal for me. My claim to fame is that I can sleep anywhere, anytime. So I'm just feeling like super out of it, and I recognize like how many times I said the word super in the last video, and I'm still doing it. Oh well. But yeah, so I feel like today's an appropriate time to talk about this particular book because I am feeling so strange. 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel García Márquez. Isn't that a pretty cover? So, I know I've been saying forever that I was going to talk about this book. Am I too zoomed in? I was trying a new thing and now I feel like we're right up my nose. I don't know. Yeah, so I've been reading this for all of May because I just didn't expect it to be so difficult for me. You never know with a new book, like you don't know how incredibly dense it's going to be. And in this case, it's very dense. So let me just give you a little background. So the author was born in 1927. He died in 2014. And let's see. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1982. So I'm just going to read the back. It's a little short thing here so we get an idea of what we're dealing with, because this is massive. It's a lot to deal with. 100 Years of Solitude tells the story of the rise and fall, birth and death of the mythical town of Macondo through the history of the Buendia family. Inventive, amusing, magnetic, sad, and alive with unforgettable men and women, brimming with truth, compassion, and a lyrical magic that strikes the soul, this novel is a masterpiece in the art of fiction. Okay, so there's Caddy. Come on, Caddy. So when you put something like that on the back of the book, and then there's also like this quote that says, 100 Years of Solitude is the first piece of literature since the Book of Genesis that should be required reading for the entire human race. Mr. García Márquez has done nothing less than to create in the reader a sense of all that is profound, meaningful, and meaningless in life. When you put something like that big of a statement on a book, I'm going to be real interested. Hang on. Let me see if I can hold her. Oh, jeez. Oh, no. She's bringing that with her. Okay, let's just get comfy. So, what I did not know about this book, I don't think I knew it before I started, was that it is an example of magical realism. Heard of it? So, I'd heard of it, but I wasn't quite... Like, I didn't have a definition in my head, so I've got a definition here. It says a literary or artistic genre in which realistic narrative and naturalistic technique are combined with surreal elements of dream or fantasy. And it's also described as magical realism or marvelous realism. It's a style of fiction that paints a realistic view of the modern world while also adding magical elements. It is sometimes called fabulism in reference to the conventions of fables, myths, and allegory. Okay. So right off the bat, that style, it doesn't appeal to me anymore. I mean, maybe when I was a kid, I was really into fantasy, but it's such a different thing from fantasy. You know, like, it's hard for me to suspend disbelief when it's magical realism. It's easier when it's fantasy or sci-fi. Because, like, magical realism is just ordinary things happening and crazy things happening at the same time, and nobody's acknowledging that this is, like, wild stuff going on. Like, this is magic. It's just part of everyday life in that story. So it's a bit jarring if you're not used to that genre. And I certainly wasn't, but this is such a famous, like... really well-renowned book, bestseller internationally, and has been said to be like the best novel written in Spanish since Don Quixote. And I mean, these are big claims that they're making, so I was like, I'm sold. What am I thinking? Yeah, the fact that it was originally in Spanish. You know how I feel about translated books? I just feel like there was something that I was missing because it was not in its original language. it's still incredibly well written. Whoa, she's trying to escape. Alright. Yeah, it's very well written, but I do feel like it would have been maybe more profound for me if I could understand it in its original language. So I just want to read, like, I just have a few phrases, observations, images that I liked in the book. A lot of it, I gotta say, like, it was really hard for me to follow, because, so, like it says, this book follows this one family for 100 years, and in the front of the book, like, this is how you know it's gonna be confusing, there is a family tree, and if you look really close, like, all the characters have the same names. Over and over throughout the decades, everyone's given these few names. Aureliano Buendia, and then Jose Arcadio Buendia, Remedios, and so those are the main ones that they just use over and over. And I got so wildly confused, I was going back to this family tree like every 5 minutes. But that being said, I mean, it's really incredible what he did. It's right here. Writing the history of an entire family line, its rise and its fall over decades, and, like, keeping it all straight, and he really, like, this guy is inventive, and it'd be hard to touch his creative genius. Like, somebody's reversing down the street like 30 miles per hour. That's, like, my worst fear. Okay. But the way this guy writes, like, even though he's writing this fantastical stuff, you just believe him, because he's just writing it like it really happened. Like, he believes it. Anyway, let's dive in here. We're gonna run out of time if we don't. Excuse me, buddy. Come on. Okay. I know. They're in rare form today. Okay. Page 95. Alright, this is going to keep happening, so thanks for sticking around. He could not understand how people arrived at the extreme of waging war over things that could not be touched with the hand. Just little observations. I don't really have much to say about these. How strange men are, she said, because she could not think of anything else to say. They spend their lives fighting against priests, and then give prayer books as gifts. The air was so damp that fish could have come in through the doors and swum out the windows, floating through the atmosphere in the rooms. That's just a really nice image. It's 417 pages, by the way. So, like, not that long, but so dense. So that's why it took me forever. Sorry, when I, like, pick quotes, I don't really have any idea where I'm supposed to start around this general area. The woman of every day, the one with her head held high and with a stony gait, did not arrive, but an old woman of supernatural beauty with a yellowed ermine cape, a crown of gilded cardboard, and the languid look of a person who wept in secret. I love that. The languid look of a person who wept in secret. That's just beautiful to me. Over here. Got one here. Oh, I thought this was funny. Gaston was not only a fierce lover with endless wisdom and imagination, but he was also perhaps the first man in the history of the species who had made an emergency landing and had come close to killing himself and his sweetheart simply to make love in a field of violets. Oh yeah, so this one, if you guys know me, Springer, buddy, hang on a second, this is out of hand. Oh, he's so cute. Good boy. Okay, stay. Good boy, I love you. If you guys know me, you know that I have I'd call it a rational fear of cockroaches. But yeah, people get on me about how it's not rational. But they have just, like, traumatized me in my life. With, like, being in my house and, like, popping out of drawers and, like, living in my closet and being in, like, my fresh washed sheets and stuff. It's just cockroaches that follow me in my life. They've gotten into my car before and, like, almost gotten me into accidents. So I just don't like them. So this part about cockroaches, they're talking about methods in the Middle Ages for killing cockroaches. He explained that the cockroach, the oldest winged insect on the face of the earth, had already been the victim of slippers in the Old Testament, but that since the species was definitely resistant to any and all methods of extermination, from tomato slices with borax to flour and sugar, and with its 1,603 varieties, had resisted the most ancient, tenacious, and pitiless persecution that mankind had unleashed against any living thing since the beginnings, including man himself, to such an extent that just as an instinct for reproduction was attributed to humankind, so there must have been another one more definite and pressing, which was the instinct to kill cockroaches. And if the latter had succeeded in escaping human ferocity, it was because they had taken refuge in the shadows, where they became invulnerable because of man's congenital fear of the dark. But on the other hand, they became susceptible to the glow of noon, so that by the Middle Ages already, and in present times, and per omnia secula seculorum, the only effective method for killing cockroaches was the glare of the sun. Man, that was hard to get through with this little guy going all over the place. He's like rubbing his face on the camera trying to knock it over. Alright, Springer, is this all about you now? Is this all about you? Okay. So, yeah, I just thought that was like a really funny, random aside in the book. Last part. This guy's trying to get on a train with a bunch of books and they're not letting him bring them, like, with him. And he says, "The world must be all effed up," he said then, "when men travel first class and literature goes as freight." I love that. So, here's the thing. I really, like, struggled with a lot of this book. Keeping track of the characters and having to suspend disbelief so much. But it was like all those weeks of like 2-hour reading sessions where I just had to like get through it and try to understand it. All of that culminated in this last page. I'm serious. The last sentence. Like the ending of the book, which I'm not going to give away because I want you to read it. I got goosebumps, like stronger goosebumps than I have in a long time, like especially from reading a book. Like I get goosebumps while reading sometimes, but this was like intense, full body. What? Now I have fur all over my lips, that's why I'm doing that. So if you've read this and you know how it ends, like, can you talk to me about it? I feel like changed by this. Like, I need to discuss it. God, he just wrote, like, this whole chronicle just to leave us off on this crazy note. Where, it's not really a spoiler, but, like, you're waiting the whole time to hear the title of the book, and he finally tells you. I love that. You know that moment when, like, in a movie or a book when they say the title and you're like, you did it. That's the title. I love that moment. So, in the back here, there's a section where they talk about the author, and this was helpful because he mentions his grandparents and how, like, the reason that he wrote this style of magical realism is because of the way that his grandmother told him stories. He says, because of their way of storytelling, especially that of his grandmother, he was unable to distinguish between the real and the fabulous. They recounted the most improbable happenings with the same facial and vocal expressions with which they recounted fact. And then he goes on to say, The tone that I eventually used in 100 Years of Solitude was based on the way my grandmother used to tell stories. She told things that sounded supernatural and fantastic, but she told them with complete naturalness. What was most important was the expression she had on her face. She did not change her expression at all when telling her stories. In previous attempts to write, I tried to tell the story without believing in it. I discovered that what I had to do was believe in them myself and write them with the same expression with which my grandmother told them, with a brick face. And that is a perfect description. Like, he's super self-aware by saying, I said super again. He's self-aware by saying that. Because the way that the narrator, he's like this detached narrator, and he is telling it with a brick face. And for me, that's hard to get into, because, yeah, you guys know I love first-person narrative, so this is totally different. This is third person to the max about all these different people, but we're never really in any of their heads, because it's all this impartial narrator. And, so yeah, the way he tells it, it is like fact, like he's telling it like it's this history. It's basically like a history book, which I get and totally works for a lot of people. It's just not my favorite style. It's not my favorite way to approach a story. But, okay, and then there's this other thing. Oh yeah, also there's a lot of politics in the book, and I'm sorry, I just can't. Like, politics and war, I totally can't get into it. Not at all. I wish I could, because I'd be able to enjoy a lot of books that other people enjoy. But there's this thing that he does a lot, which is saying, like, it's in the first sentence of the book. Like, let's just look at that. We're good on time. He says, many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. So he even starts the book with saying many years later, which to me is this literary device that takes you out of the moment. And in this case, immediately makes me not care about the characters, because, like, he usually tells us, you know, years later when she dies, this happens. And I'm like, oh, well, I don't care anymore about this person, because you know that she's gonna die within this narrative, so, like, why should I get invested in anything that happens to them, you know? But, that being said, I forgot to mention this in the Essex Serpent video. Sarah Perry did this thing where she did a lot, where she said, later, when talking about this, she would say, you know, later when discussing the event that happened, blah, blah, blah. That totally took me out of the story. The narrative was gone at that point. I was like, oh, well, we're getting through this, so why do I care about this event if you're telling me that we're going to get through it and we're going to talk about it later? There's no stakes at that point. But what I'm saying is that Márquez does it better, because it's different. It's like, he's just clearly an incredible writer. And so, like, I can't fault him for anything. This is anything that I'm saying that sounds like criticism right now is, like, just me not being into magical realism or politics, or just not really understanding what's going on. But I'm not saying I didn't like the book. I liked it. I liked the whole idea of it, and the ending blew me away. And, like, if I had more knowledge about Colombia, and, like, 'cause that's where he's from, and so it's a made-up town that you assume is in Colombia. If I knew more about it and its history, it might be easier for me. And, my grandmother actually grew up in Colombia, and I never got to talk to her about that part of her life, but I wish I had. You know, talk to your grandparents. Okay, what was I gonna say? I had to go on YouTube and watch a video about this book so that I could kind of understand what in the world I had just read. And this person mentioned some interesting things, like about how this family and this whole town, it moves, like, their time doesn't move in a linear fashion. It's like a cyclical time thing going on. Like, the characters with all their names being repeated, they're like almost reincarnated. There's people that die, but then they're like still there, and they don't really say that they're ghosts, but they're just still there, even though you know, like 20 pages ago that guy died. It's very interesting. It's strange. And this guy in the video talked about history as this downward spiral, and like everybody knows that in this family that they're just spiraling towards this ultimate disaster. And like they're all doomed. It's very weird. I don't know, I was really like nervous about making this video, and now I'm like, it's not good at all because I just don't know what I'm talking about. But I want somebody to talk to me about this because I feel like there's so much there that is just glorious that I'm missing out on because I'm not comprehending it fully. So I think I'm gonna go and like read some analyses and reviews and things. Yeah, I'm like speechless. It was quite a journey reading this book. That's what it is, really. Like, it's a journey. And it's kind of cool because you get to follow these people for such a long time. Like, usually I like books that happen over a short period of time, not like, you know, a sweeping epic where it's decades and decades. Usually I like a tighter timeline. But this is so, like, how dumb can I sound in this video? I'm surprised anybody's still watching. It's so thought-provoking, but for me, wasn't as, like, profoundly moving as I expected it to be because of the whole detached narrator thing. But he does make these observations, and even when they're, like, magical observations, you can feel them and feel how real they are, and what point he's trying to make about actual humanity and what we do to each other and ourselves. I wish I had some more cohesive thoughts, and I even wrote like so many notes, and here we are. So if somebody wants to explain their take on this book to me, that would be great. Oh, I did want to mention that apparently this will be coming to Netflix as a series in Spanish, and I don't know when. I couldn't find a date for when they're going to actually do it, but like it was announced this year that they're going to do it. And this book was written in 1967, and I'm really excited to see the Netflix series. I think that is going to be a really good platform for this story, because it can be so confusing when you're reading it, but I can picture the characters like with all their identical names, but in the show you'll be able to see them so you can tell the difference and you know who they are the whole time. And I think it's fantastic that like they wouldn't agree to anybody picking this up as a show unless it was in Spanish. I think it's going to be excellent, and I think they can do a lot with all the magical stuff that happens in here, all the really weird things that are just slightly off. I think on screen it's going to look awesome. So I'm excited about that, and sometimes I do like read a book and then watch the adaptation and think these go hand in hand, like they actually really complement each other, and one isn't better than the other. I mean, I'm always going to say the book is better because it's a book, it's literature, it's but you know, there's writing that goes into the shows too, so I can't say that there's no writing involved. It's just, it's very different. So yeah, I always read the book before I see something. Not 100% of the time, but I try to. Just as a personal rule. So I'm running out of time here. This is the last video for a few weeks until I get back from Vermont, and then I'm not sure what I'll talk about because I think I'm just going to listen to like 3 audiobooks while I'm out there. So wish me luck, you guys. Here I go, into the wild, and I'll talk to you next time, alright? See ya. Bye.